as you know from when you joined, you probably got a notification, but I'll say it out loud again. We are recording tonight, so we can share this with folks far and wide. And to that end, we welcome you to show up in a way that's comfortable for you, meaning if you want to have your camera on, we always love to see more faces. And that is always helpful as a speaker to be able to see the facial expression of folks you're speaking to. But if you also prefer to keep your camera off, that is completely fine. Whatever is most comfortable for you works just fine. And I am Liz Moore. I'm the executive director of the Peace and Justice Action League. And I'm sort of filling in tonight for our wonderful colleague Union, our community organizer here at Pajals, who's not feeling well. And so I'm pinch hitting just a little bit. So bear with me if we have any technical difficulties along the way. As always bear with me if there are technical difficulties along the way, whether I'm pinch hitting or not. And we're very, very happy to be hosting Brother Moji Agha this evening to talk with us. His talk is called Peace and Truth Heals, Building Stronger Movements Together. And for those who may not be as familiar with the Peace and Justice Action League, we are a nearly 50-year-old independent membership-based organization. Our mission is to build a just and nonviolent world. And we do that work, we approach that work through community organizing and grassroots leadership development with a deep belief and knowledge and experience that everyday people have the power to accomplish extraordinary things together. And that the way we can do that is through organizing. Our priorities this year are focused on 4 pillars: grassroots leadership development, which I'll talk more about in a minute, as well as ongoing commitment to ending mass incarceration and systemic racism in our city, county criminal legal system, countering white nationalist organizing and American fascism, and countering American imperialism and militarism. In our grassroots leadership development work, I want to particularly welcome the peacekeepers who attended their first peacekeeper training on Saturday. Joined our team of volunteer peacekeepers to help do de-escalation at community events and protests. And I want to highlight our wonderful program called BOLD, which kicks off for the springtime next Saturday with a day-long training that is focused, next Saturday? Nope, June 1st, week and a half, that is focused on uncovering and building deeper understanding of the ways that coded racism, dog whistle racism, as some call it, works to manipulate and divide working people from each other. So that's on June 1st, and we welcome you to check that out on our website, peacejustice.org, and register for that. So that's what we've got coming up, and right now we're very happy to be hosting you all to hear from Brother Moji. Before we go any further, I want to share an acknowledgement and a call to action. The acknowledgement is that we are on the stolen, unceded lands of the Spokane people, the Spokanee, and other interior Salish people who have stewarded this land where I stand, where most of us are located since time immemorial. And we want to say this acknowledgement to tell the truth about the reality of the people who are already here, to begin to counter the doctrine of discovery, and to say that our words are only as effective as our actions. And so we also make this land acknowledgement as a call to action to encourage folks to give to Indigenous-led organizations here and around the world. Here in the land of the Spokanee, in particular, what we always love to highlight: the Salish School, the Urban Native Youth Organization, Yo-Yo Spokanee, and quite a number of other organizations. So we encourage you to learn about and support Indigenous-led efforts here in our region and around the world. I want to share with you our values and community agreements. We look forward to a discussion tonight and a Q&A session. And particularly in events like this, it's important that we lift up these community agreements. We strive to make brave and welcoming space for everyone so that we can take action together on our shared goals that's based in respect. An anti-oppression commitment that if oppressive behaviors are happening, we name it, we address it, we own it, and we learn from it. The value of support. We support each other by sharing the air during discussions. That in particular means if you know that you're a front of the classroom person and you're usually one of the first two people to raise your hand in a discussion, invite you to be one of the fourth or fifth people to raise your hand. And if you know you're maybe more of a middle of the classroom, back of the classroom person, you tend to hold back, we invite you to consider being one of the first people to speak tonight. That's sharing the air. We speak from our own experiences and perspectives. We learn from our differences. We welcome curiosity. We aim to be curious, challenge our own assumptions, and work from sound and current data rather than old information that may never have been accurate, may not be accurate now. We seek to be aware of our choices so that we can make those choices consciously, not reactively or through our conditioning or indoctrination. We seek learning and improving together. We seek focus. We ask everyone to help limit distractions and sidebars so that we can have a unified conversation. So one thing that means is that if we'd ask you to use the chat to ask questions along the way if you need to, but mostly be aware that we want to encourage focus and listening to Brother Moji. And so we don't want to have conversations in the chat that become a separate event from what is happening on the main screen. And clear agreements, in the name of clear agreements, that's why we're sharing these community agreements, that we have clarity and transparency about our expectations together, and then we can make new agreements as needed. So those are our values. You can always find them online at pgiles.org/values. And now I want to introduce Brother Moji. Very delighted to be hosting him here tonight. I want to share with you a quote from Professor Noam Chomsky, who says, "I have been most impressed with the initiatives of Moji Agha, especially as he has been developing the comprehensive Intersectional Circles movement project, also known as Circles of Nonviolence or Community Collaboratives Initiative, and with their efforts to engage people to undertake the tasks that must be addressed with dedication and commitment if there are to be hopes of decent survival. And I'm pleased to endorse these very valuable policies and actions." Brother Moji is a retired mental health professional and university educator in both psychology and related social sciences, including conflict resolution. Brother Moji is a Sufi monk or dervish with a vow of service and poverty. He left a promising career well over 2 decades ago, shifting his extensive education and experience to the healing of Grandmother Earth. He has had a 4 decades long professional, clinical, and academic background in behavioral, cultural, and ecological studies and conflict understanding and healing. And now he's undertaken this Peace and Truth Heals speaking tour. Brother Moji Agha has distilled the essence of almost 5 decades of scholarship and especially civility activism into the currently unfolding Peace and Truth Heals initiative or PATH, which is an educational speaking tour hosted by many civil society groups and open-minded spiritual congregations, fellowships, and churches in the Western U.S. and Canada. In the presentations of this Peace Pilgrim journey, Brother Moji will cover the 3 topics that are outlined in this introductory summary profile. And with that, I ask you to join me in welcoming Brother Moji. And we're so glad to have you here with us tonight, virtually, in the land of the interior Salish. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you. And let me know if you'd like me to continue sharing, or shall I take the slides down? I'll just follow your lead on the slides.
Yeah, if you take the slides down, so I am hoping to be able to see as many of the people who would feel comfortable, showing their face. Thank you very much. And this is my second, presentation hosted by your wonderful organization, Peace and Justice Action League of Spokane, in the state of Washington in the U.S. And I am delighted to say that this session is being co-hosted by the chapter, the local chapter of Veterans for Peace, of which I am an associate member. I'm also a member, a Muslim member of Jewish Voice for Peace, and a former retired member of Psychologists for Social Responsibility, and I'm also a member of Historians for Peace and Democracy. So thank you for hosting me. And for the second time, the first time was 2013 at the Salem Lutheran Church. In the background, you'll see a big, wonderful cross. I am sitting and doing this session from the Peace Church of Chinatown in Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's a Mennonite congregation. And also we have a brother Travis Martin from a sister congregation. So it's wonderful to have one of the people that are very kind to me as I am staying for a while in Vancouver, and I am hoping to have these presentations in Canadian quote unquote moderate churches, so that we can overcome that divide, the big divide in the Western civilization between the people who are religious and non-religious. It's one of the greatest divide and conquer gulfs that have been created, so that people who share the calamity, for example, of climate change, and it doesn't matter whether they're religious or not, it doesn't matter what religion they are attracted to or they profess, they are affected by all of these issues, intersectional issues of war, or injustice in different forms, climate change, and oppressions of different forms. So we are affected by all of these intersectional problems, i.e., they are interrelated, and therefore we need to find ways of building bridges on the basis of nonviolence. That's a bedrock of what I'm doing, and I can explain a little bit more about this later in the Iranian nonviolence aspect of this talk, and so that we can then develop chambers of compassion. And I am again delighted to report that as a result of the first phase of this speaking tour, right now this is the first session of the second phase of the speaking tour. And unfortunately, I couldn't be in Spokane, although I was in Spokane on May 5th. And it was a wonderful, well-attended gathering of lovers and peace and justice in Spokane at the community center on Main Street. And but I couldn't, because of the challenges of the calendar, I could not be physically in Spokane. So I am hoping that the few people who are hearing my what I'm saying and participate in this hopefully discussion, that is, if I let you talk, you'll see that may not happen. No, I'll try to make it happen. And but so that we can then okay, I distracted myself. The VFP chapter in Spokane, Washington, supported by PJALS, Peace and Justice League, Action League of Spokane, is working with the VFP Veterans for Peace chapter in Missoula, Montana, which was another place I spoke at a church in Missoula. And the two VFP chapters, Veterans for Peace chapters, have decided, or we are beginning the process of working together between the two chapters to create the first two chambers of compassion or intersectional circles. Now, the intersectional circles or the chamber of compassion, which I will explain a little bit more about, is what Professor Noam Chomsky blessed me with endorsing. So anyhow, I am hoping that within the next few months, we're going to have a number of these chambers of compassion, beginning to form. And they just to give you just a 15-second summary that can really help people relate to why it's called the Chamber of Compassion. You see huge corporations and their allies, they have this thing called the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is called the same thing, regardless of location. So, and we can see how successful the many institutions of that, one of them is the Chamber of Commerce, the many institutions of making this planet hostage to, greed, for lack of any better term, how successful they have been. And so we, on the side of peace and healing and truth, we have a lot of intersectional work, and we do a lot of work on peace, justice, human rights, whatever our good cause, but we are extremely scattered or fragmented. So the Chamber of Compassion is a way of creating with the help of the existing organizations such as PJALS, an entity that is called the same thing regardless of where, so that we can then build geographic synergy in the same way that the Chamber of Commerce has been able to do that. So anyhow, I am delighted to say that two chapters of Veterans for Peace that are the latest chapters to become organizational allies of PATH, Peace and Truth Heals. They are beginning conversations with me as cheerleader, I guess, of creating the Chamber of Compassion of Missoula, Montana, and Spokane, Washington. So anyhow, since we are talking about compassion, and also because right now, especially after October 7, there is massive demonization of people like me. I'm a Middle Eastern male. And then worse, I'm from Iran and I'm a Muslim. I'm a Sufi Muslim, but that doesn't make any difference to people who see Muslims are just one big herd of animals. So it is, there has been for many centuries actually of Orientalism, as Edward Said described it in his seminal work, called Orientalism, the late Edward Said, the Christian Palestinian, scholar and public intellectual, there has been lots and lots of racism, in different forms. And so there is this beautiful song based on the 800-year-old poetry of Sadi of Shiraz. It's called Bani Adam. This piece is called Bani Adam. And I will just give my translation, although you may be able to see in the recording the subtitles, but I believe my translation is better than what they have done. Anyhow, I'm joking, but I learned this. I had to memorize this as a third grader, like any other Iranian child. And Sadi of Shiraz, one of the giants of Persian literature, he writes 800 years ago, this emblem of nonviolence. Remember, Muslims are not supposed to be nonviolent. But Sadi of Shiraz, 800 years ago, wrote this poem that I translate right now. The members of humanity are limbs to one body, made from the same one precious divine essence. When the passage of time brings pain to one limb, other limbs cannot remain in a state of rest or lack of distress. Therefore, Sadi of Shiraz admonishes moral admonishment to awaken consciences that have gone to sleep. Therefore, he says, therefore, you who are indifferent to the suffering of others, it's not fitting that you be called a human being. So now watch this beautifully internationally produced song, based on this poem, and you'll see how it is people from all over the world, musicians and singers, are embodying being limbs to one body. So if I could ask Sister Liz to play that one.
بنی آدم اعضای یک پیکرند که در آفرینش ز یک گوهرند چو عضوی به درد آورد روزگار دگر عضوها را نماند قرار تو که از محنت دیگران بی‌غمی نشاید که نامت نهند آدمی. Gli esseri umani sono parte di un unico corpo,
vengono dalla stessa perla. Quando una delle parti soffre di qualche male, anche le altre provano dolore. Non puoi considerarti parte dell'umanità se non hai compassione di quel dolore.
So, this is one 800-year-old sample of Iranian or Islamic, if you will, although there are two different civilizations, but they are interrelated. One example of nonviolence, foundations of nonviolence. We are limbs to one body. Then there is that other, usual suspect, Sufi poet, Rumi. He writes 800 years ago, impossible to wash blood with blood. Impossible. When I read that poem in Persian, I sense, I'm a mediocre poet compared to Rumi and Hafiz and others, but as a poet, I can sense the anger, the frustration of Rumi. He is trying to scream at people 800 years ago. It is impossible to wash blood with blood. Ferdowsi, the father of Iranian epic poetry, wrote 1,000 years ago, "Seek love, O all, and make magic, create wonder." In other words, take off the attire of war. Take off the attire of war. Humanity's well-being flows out of peace. So may all who want war disappear. And then Hafiz of Shiraz, another of these giants, who may be my ancestor, by the way. I have no way of proving it, but there seems to be some connection because of my family tree. The celebrated Iranian Sufi poet, the immortal Hafiz of Shiraz, wrote these immortal words of deep love 7 centuries ago. in both worlds, here and the hereafter, true peace comes from these two words of timeless wisdom, if sincerely practiced. With friends, compassion, real love. With foes, coexistence, tolerance, sharing, and compromise. Two words, compassion and coexistence. We are limbs to the same body. It is impossible to wash blood with blood. And then Ferdowsi, expressing in his 1,000-year-old poem about trying to explain or reflect or express the feelings, the deepest feelings of a person who is saying the same thing as the Veterans for Peace are saying today. Take off the attire of war. Humanity's well-being flows out of peace. And then that person, that general or that soldier that has been used as cannon fodder, he, in his rage, he says, may all who want war disappear. So, again, we're dealing with Iranian nonviolence or Islamic, in part Islamic nonviolence. Compare that to the propaganda that we hear in the civilized West, regardless of that part of the world. Muslims are supposed to be savages. Same way that the doctrine of discovery, which I am sure you're familiar with, the doctrine of discovery was a papal bull at the end of 1400s. And in the name of religion, it said it is okay to be savage. And it is ordained by God. The doctrine of discovery is being practiced in the way that after October 7, the Israeli defense minister referred to Palestinians as animals. In the same way that Pope, in this papal bull, which I call it papal bullshit, it's the doctrine of discovery is the father or the mother, if you will, of colonialism, of settler colonialism, which is its more severe form these days. And apartheid, all of them come from that notion that we are a chosen people, chosen by God. Therefore, we have the right to do whatever we wish to those human beings, as well as plants and animals, as well as microorganisms, and to the environment, whatever we want. Now, another person that lives in this world, and his name is Ayatollah Khamenei, the so-called supreme leader of Iran. His revolutionary court, circuit number 15 in Tehran, has a in absentia execution order against yours truly, against me, for the crime of warring against God. Warring against God, therefore, the so-called revolutionary court of this regime, that is the delight of Netanyahu of Israel. he, I am condemned to death in the name of God. So when my Jewish brothers and sisters who are members of Jewish Voice for Peace and Veterans for Peace and other lovers of peace and justice, but specifically the Jewish Voice for Peace and other Jews of conscience, such as Noam Chomsky and others, when they say what is being practiced in Gaza is not in our name, I say the same thing. When Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran and his so-called Islamic regime imposes hijab, head covering, dress code on women, imposes it, I say not in my name, because I'm a Muslim, and in Islam, hijab is not supposed to be forced. If a woman chooses to wear hijab, that's her prerogative. When you impose hijab, it is against Islam. And I'm sitting in a church, so I know how to throw verse around, but we don't have time for that kind of theological discussion, nor am I an expert in any way. But the demon, my hope is that as a result of these chambers of compassion being created in different communities, another thing that is needed, and I'm hoping that people who are interested to begin the process of undemonization clubs, undemonization club, let's say of Spokane, Washington, in which the people in Spokane, those who are interested, would begin identifying the demonized populations, demonized people in their region. So in Missoula and in Kalispell, Montana, they began identifying or talking about in my presentation in the discussion that the homeless are extremely demonized. Therefore, we need to undemonize the unhoused or the homeless. So undemonization club as something that would come out of the Iranian nonviolence aspect of path, peace, and truth heals. And then relatedly to undemonization, which is a product of the doctrine of discovery, is the Native/American truth and reconciliation process. Now, here in Canada, as a result of a lawsuit, unfortunately, but nonetheless, they do have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but it is focused only on those awful, awful genocide-making schools, residential schools. So the idea of a Native/American Truth and Reconciliation, which is what I began dreaming about at Standing Rock. I was part of the Standing Rock uprising. And so the Native/American Truth and Reconciliation tent, I wanted to call it an NATR teepee, but then I realized teepees are specific to certain tribes or nations. So NATR, Native/American Truth and Reconciliation tents, to begin advocating for building grassroots support for a demand in the U.S. for a Native/American Truth and Reconciliation process, so that the perpetrators and the victims, both of them, need healing. So part of one of the ideas I came up with, and then it was approved, is this: thanks healing. The night before Thanksgiving in 2016, I realized, we were talking, I was called an interfaith leader, for whatever, lack of any better term. And I was talking with a number of elders, and they said, yeah, tomorrow is so-called Thanksgiving, but we're going to feed people, but not as Thanksgiving, for obvious reasons. So as I drove to the Unitarian Universalist, the house of the Unitarian Universalist, president of the congregation, at her house, I was staying and organizing behind, being supportive to the encampment. I thought, boy, we need to have a different name for Thanksgiving, and so I came up with this Thanks Healing. So Native/American Truth and Reconciliation tents would build, with the help of moderate churches who are becoming more and more aware of the role churches played in the genocide of native indigenous peoples of this continent. They would then build collaboration across congregation, collaboration across religions, collaboration across the border, to build a movement to demand a truth and reconciliation process. In the U.S., there is a bill languishing in the committee in Congress to try to create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, except with the current political forces in this country, that I don't think that's going to happen for a long time. But if it is to happen, it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be with the grassroots nonviolent pressure from the bottom. Hence, out of the Native/American Truth and Reconciliation aspect of Path, Peace, and Truth Heals, NATR tents. And then, of course, the other aspect I began talking about, the Chamber of Compassion, or the Intersectional Circle, which is what I began. And I spoke in Spokane in 2013, the beginnings of it. I called it at that time Circle of Nonviolence. And then I added Circle of Nonviolence and Community Collaborative. Eventually, I said, okay, I need to find a shorter title. And people said, Moji, this is too long. It's not going to go anywhere. And I recognized that reality. So Intersectional Circles, but then I became aware of, through a number of events, of the Chamber of Commerce. So I went to Chambers of Commerce in Tucson, and then Albuquerque and Santa Fe, New Mexico, in order to see what it is they actually do. What they do in the Chamber of Commerce, which is called the same thing everywhere, is systemic collaboration across industry. It's a horizontal organization, the Chamber of Commerce. It's not a hierarchical one, i.e., one industry being the Lord and other ones being being lesser ones. They are equal. And what they do, they put together and pull together their resources, their efforts, their ingenuity, in order to then, for example, in Tucson, Arizona, to hire lobbyists with the money that different corporations in southern Arizona raised to hire lobbyists, not for the U.S. Congress, they have lots of lobbyists there, but the city council and the county board of supervisors. And I saw, wow, look how systemic collaboration across industry, how it works, in creating synergy. Therefore, it's able to influence policy. Another thing, they all three chambers of commerce that I attended, they were raising money for campaign contributions, i.e. bribe, for the chamber approved candidates. Okay, I don't think with the crowd that I see, I don't need to go into how corrupting that is. But then we, as peace activists, environmental activists, human rights activists, gender equity activists, climate change activists, whatever our good cause, we don't have a chamber of compassion that is called the same thing everywhere. So that's the third objective. And with that, we have a very few people. One of the things that I want to, before ending the formal, quote unquote, my formal talk, is to show a clip regarding what is happening in Gaza. And this is something that, a little documentary that may have caused Mehdi Hassan, the Pakistani Muslim journalist. I think this particular clip may have had a major part in him losing his program on MSNBC. So if you could play that, then I can explain. Just watch.
The Palestinian militant group Hamas has carried out brutal acts of terror against Israeli civilians. And Israeli and American leaders are always keen to tell us how dangerous and evil Hamas is.
Inhumanity of Hamas.
I have no sympathy for Hamas.
That keep shelling Israel with thousands of rockets and mortar shells.
But what if I told you that Israel helped create Hamas? Officially, Hamas, which is the acronym for an Arabic phrase meaning Islamic Resistance Movement, was founded in 1987, at the start of the first Palestinian Intifada, or uprising against the Israeli occupation. But its roots were planted much earlier. The Hamas founder, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, was a half-blind, disabled Palestinian cleric and member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Brotherhood had been repressed by the Egyptians in Gaza prior to 1967, but once the Israelis invaded and occupied the Strip, they didn't just turn a blind eye to these Islamists, they encouraged them. See, the Israelis, especially right-wing Israelis, wanted to undermine the power of the dominant Palestinian political force at that time, the nationalist PLO, at the heart of which was the secular Fatah party of Yasser Arafat, their bête noire.
بغصن الزيتون في يدي وببندقية الثائر في يدي.
By empowering Sheikh Yassin and the Muslim Brotherhood, Israeli leaders thought they could divide and rule the occupied Palestinians, play them off against each other, secular nationalists against religious Islamists. So in 1978, when Yassin wanted to officially register his Islamic Association, which was basically the precursor to Hamas, the Israelis were only too keen to help. Yassin built and grew a network of Islamist social institutions across Gaza, including schools and clubs and mosques, and Israel helped fund some of those projects. Most American politicians have no clue about any of this, although the former Republican Congressman Ron Paul once made this point on the floor of the House.
Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat.
Arafat himself told an Italian newspaper, quote, Hamas is a creature of Israel. He even claimed that former Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin admitted as much to him, calling it a fatal error. Now, you might be wondering, why should I believe mad Ron Paul or the famously shady Yasser Arafat? Well, you don't have to. You can believe top Israeli and US officials who've basically owned up to all this. Brigadier Yitzhak Segev, for example, who was the Israeli military governor in Gaza and later told a New York Times reporter that he helped finance the Islamic movement. The Israeli government gave me a budget, he said, and the military government gives to the mosques. Colonel David Hakam, who worked in Gaza in the late 1980s as an Arab affairs expert in the Israeli military, has admitted that the original sin was Israeli support for Yassin in the late 70s. But at the time, he has argued, nobody thought about the possible results. Well, Avner Cohen did. Cohen was the Israeli official who was responsible for religious affairs in Gaza for more than 2 decades, and who now says, quote, Hamas, to my great regret, is Israel's creation. Yeah. Cohen's words. He actually wrote an official report to his superiors in the mid-1980s, warning them not to play divide and rule in the occupied territories and calling on Israel to, quote, break up this monster before this reality jumps in our face. But no one else on the Israeli side really took the possibility of blowback seriously at that time. They never do they? Hamas has since killed far more Israeli civilians than any secular Palestinian militant group, and its leaders have been pretty viciously anti-Israeli and even anti-Semitic in their rhetoric.
لن نعترف بإسرائيل.
لا مكان لكم بيننا ولا مستقبل لكم بين الأمم إنكم إلى زوال.
Sheikh Yassin would eventually be assassinated by an Israeli airstrike in Gaza.
Sheikh Yassin and its organization, the Hamas, are responsible to the killings of more than 400 Israelis. So the question shouldn't be why now. I think it should be why not before.
Why not before? Well, because before, Israel was actually nudging and winking at Yassin and co., building them up as a rival to Arafat's Fatah. The die was cast for blowback. Blowback, incidentally, that they decided to double down on when they assassinated Yassin.
You can hear the crowds chanting for Hamas, and any idea that this operation would actually suppress or diminish that organization seems to be ill-judged.
The inconvenient truth is that Hamas is in part a creature of Israel's own making, an enemy that Israel spent more than 20 years helping to build up, and then spent the next 20 years, the past 20 years that is, trying to bomb, besiege, and blockade out of existence. The 3 Gaza wars fought by Israel against Hamas since 2008 killed around 2,000 Palestinian civilians and a dozen Israeli civilians. That's the real human cost of blowback. David Long, a former Middle East expert at the US State Department under Ronald Reagan, told journalist Robert Dreyfus, I thought the Israelis were playing with fire. I didn't realize they'd end up creating a monster. But I don't think you ought to mess around with potential fanatics. It's a lesson both the Israelis and the Americans never seem to learn, though. And as usual, innocent people, in this case Palestinians and Israelis, continue to lose their lives as a result.
Okay. Compare what you have learned in the mass media, the legacy media, the major media in the US and Canada and other civilized global north nations. Compare that with the propaganda that uses Hamas to demonize, collectively punish Palestinians, Muslims, Iranians, and notice one of the biggest issues that is challenging our Mother Earth. Mother Earth does not need any more hatred, especially manufactured hatred. For the purpose of what? For the purpose of justifying in the US every year $1.1 trillion, $1,100 billion every year goes to military and quote-unquote intelligence. So in order to justify that kind of a budget, take away the money that is needed in order to deal with the homeless, for example, and climate, the climate catastrophe. In order to divert those monies to militarism for the benefit of the Chamber of Commerce approved industries, military industrial complex industries, corporations, you need to create demonization. You need to demonize. You need to make hatred, create hatred. So you create Hamas. Israel creates Hamas and funds mosques in Gaza, fundamentalist mosques in Gaza. Why? Because Israel wants to turn the conflict in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into a religious conflict. Why? Because Israel calls itself the Jewish state. Therefore, the conflict that it engages in needs to be religious. Who else in the Middle East loves that? His name is Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, and the Taliban, and ISIS, and others. But Khamenei of Iran, that has a death, execution order against me for the crime of warring against God, he loves Netanyahu turning the conflict in the region into a religious conflict. Why? Because the so-called Islamic Republic of Iran wants to, it shouts from the rooftops, we are an Islamic, quote unquote, a, whatever nation state or republic. Of course, the regime in Iran is neither, the secular democracy has been killed since the overthrow of Dr. Mossadegh in 1953 by the CIA. But the regime has killed secular democracy in Iran and says that it is a war between good and evil. Of course, us, the regime, being good, others as evil. Same thing with the Israeli regime, that in the name of creating a safe, a safe place for Jews, wants to turn Israel into a Goliath. So as a Muslim, I stand up to anti-Semitism. I say in the same way that what the regime in Iran is doing is un-Islamic, for example, imposing hijab on women, what Israel or the likes of Netanyahu are doing in Israel is against Judaism. Turning Israel into a Goliath is anti-Semitic, deeply, deeply anti-Semitic. And of course, this is something that my brothers and sisters in Jewish Voice for Peace have been shouting, not in our name. And I say, not in my name, to the Ayatollah Khamenei of Iran, which is then says, okay, you're against my abuse of Islam. Therefore, perhaps if we could get our hand on you, we'll kill you. And of course, the Netanyahu says, oh, Palestinians, of course, they create Hamas, encourages it to be violent. They create Hamas in order to justify their abuse of Judaism. So I end by saying this, that Dr. Mossadegh of Iran, overthrown in 1953 by the CIA and MI6 in that awful coup that killed Iran's secular democracy, with the help of the religious mullahs and with the indirect help of the Soviet Union. He said, Dr. Mossadegh, after the coup, internal despotism and external colonialism are two sides of the same coin. Internal despotism, Ayatollah Khamenei; external colonialism, Benjamin Netanyahu. They need one another as enemy. So we need to really pay attention to the forces, ideological populism forces that are spreading like wildfire on our Mother Earth. So Trump wants to make America great again. Modi of India wants to make India Hindu nationalism great again. Trump wants to have, Christian nationalism in the U.S. Khamenei of Iran wants to make Shia Iran great again. Netanyahu of Israel wants to make Israel great again. And there are other examples of ideological populism. Ideological populism imposes itself from the top onto the society through the two mechanisms: militarism and mass stupefaction. Destroying public schools so that people do not learn critical thinking. And then, of course, weapons of mass propaganda, mass deception. Ideological populism imposes a predetermined solution, quote unquote, simplified solution for the society, and wants to impose it by force and by fooling people, giving them, very simplified so-called solution to their complex problems. And so the ideological populism has different forms. It wears religious dress or religious garb or nationalistic garb or racial garb, economic garb, the Wall Street. I was part of the Occupy movement. On the other hand, we have something that I kind of hesitate to call it populism, but democratic populism. Democratic populism does not impose because it is democratic. And so, for example, Dr. Mossadegh of Iran, Gandhi of India, and then Bernie Sanders. They try to translate the people's needs in a simple language so that people can understand, the roots of their suffering. So anyhow, these two forms of populism are important, and a lot of times people do not make that distinction. Ideological populism versus democratic populism. Sorry if I got carried away. So let's begin some kind of a discussion. I told you I may not let you talk, but now let's see what thoughts, feelings, questions, objections.
And we'll just welcome whatever means, folks, if you want to share a question or thought in the chat, if you want to raise your hand and share it verbally, either way is fine. Whatever works.
May I ask how many of you were there on May 5th at my talk at the community center in the Spokane? Jennifer has her hand up. Unmute.
I do, and Hollis does.
Oh, I see. Okay, nice.
That was quite a nice gathering. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things that happened in that gathering was that, as you may remember, I see what I'm driving is called the Nonviolence Mobile. And as you may remember, I am collecting little monies for the community-owned nonviolence / path mobile. See, I'm called I am the pathman, not the Batman. And what I drive is a presently privately owned, my own, Mercury Sable 1997 nonviolence / path mobile. But the next one that I'm going to be driving in the third phase of this tour, I would like it to be a community-owned nonviolence mobile. So people began paying up to $5. And so far we have 326 shares, community shares, contributed by 126 shareholders.
Can you put in the chat how we would contribute?
You could give this money to Sister Liz at PJALS, and then they will figure out a way of getting it to me, so I can deposit it in the Pathmobile account. And you could also get other people and make sure you give your name and the number of quote unquote shares, which cannot be more than 5, because I want as many people as possible to feel that they have some kind of a connection to this little pathmobile that is driving from town to town, advocating for chambers of compassion. In this tour called Peace and Truth Heals. And so if you give your name and the number of shares, i.e. how many dollars, there is $1 per share. And so you can send it to Sister Liz and PJALS, but make sure you give the name, so that I add your name to the list of shareholders. You see, I'm using Wall Street terms, greed terms, but I am subverting their meaning to compassion, to peace.
And on that note,
healing.
I see questions in the chat.
Sure.
Maybe it's 3 questions now. The first 2 seem related. I just scrolled too fast. Aruna is asking, hi, Aruna, how do we get politicians to listen to our concerns? And Trish is asking, saying, thank you for offering this way of connecting movements. I'm wondering how you envision the chambers of compassion working together to enact change. And then, you know, Heather has what seems to me another facet of this is the question we are facing. All of these are the question. As we recognize that we are all limbs of one body across countries, religious beliefs, etc., how do we rise and act as one voice? War and war politics are intentionally divisive, making monsters of others. Those seem like 3 ways of asking a very big central question.
Oh, wow. Okay. How do you get politicians to represent we the people? We need to have to defragment the civil society. Defragging or defragmenting civil society is the mechanism for it, is the chamber of compassion. So that the work of peace activists and climate change activists and the human rights activists and the democracy activists and whatever are good cause, that the effect of what we do is cumulative. Now, one of the people that has endorsed this project her name is Dr. Erica Chenoweth. You may have heard her name, and her 3.5% theory. He did a major research comparing violent uprisings and nonviolent uprisings over 100 years and realized that nonviolent uprisings and resistance movements have been more successful than violent ones. And her more recent research is to show that nonviolent uprisings led by women have been more successful than the ones led by men. So Dr. Chenoweth, who is a wonderful researcher, and I am proud that he has endorsed the Chambers of Compassion or Intersectional Circle. He showed through her research that when 3.5% of the population of a country is actively engaged in nonviolent resistance, then the political forces, the political, economic, cultural, and whatever forces, they don't have any choice but to have structural change. 3.5%. Now, how many times you've seen the same group of people at the corner of Hope and Fear Street in various American towns holding the same signs over and over and over again, week after week, year after year? I can tell you, based on my own observation and research, we have more than 3.5% of the American population wanting structural change, real meaningful change, except that we are extremely fragmented. And we don't have a mechanism by which, for example, PJALs would help. PJALs has been doing intersectional work, beautiful intersectional work, except it's called PJALs. Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice has been doing some of the same, bringing different causes together. but it's called Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice. As I've traveled in the past, since 2013, I have seen so many of, of people or centers and peace centers, and even within religious congregations, the Quakers, they do beautiful intersectional work, collaboration, except it has its own brand. Chamber of Commerce, on the other hand, the corporations have figured out they need to have something that is called the same thing. And the Chamber of Commerce does not destroy, it does not unify. It actually amplifies diversity. And it amplifies diversity. Why? Because you need people's hearts, different hearts are animated with different passions. Therefore, when you have people following their own bliss, so to speak, but there is a container for bringing their work together, which is called the same thing across, across the planet. Well, across the country. Sorry, I think about the planet. I'm so worried about what's happening to our planet. The rate of extinction of a species is 3 per hour. So when we effectively organize, as in the case of, episodic organization of the Occupy movement, of the Standing Rock uprising, the Bernie, the 2016 campaign, these are examples that if you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. So Chamber of Compassion would begin, as in the case of the Veterans for Peace chapters in Spokane and Missoula, working together to create their respective Chamber of Compassion. So from the get-go, these two chambers created, or spearheaded by the Veterans for Peace chapters of the two area, they are collaborating from the get-go. So in terms of the question as to how we make politicians pay attention to we the people, as opposed to being, bribed by huge corporations, is we build the numbers. Without the numbers, without the critical mass, it's not going to happen. They're going to divide and conquer forever and ever. They're going to, for example, say, the problem, although we are fleecing the poor white in the US, and the poor whites then go to somebody like Trump for solace, they say, oh, it's the Mexicans who are doing it. It's the Muslims that are doing it. It's the LGBTQ that is doing it. It's the trans people. They distract people, with using different methods of ideological populism in order to confuse people, so they can't trust any source of information, real information. Therefore, they say, okay, come to Fox News and other, weapons of mass stupefaction, and we'll help you. We'll give you, simplified little thingies that would make you feel good. But it doesn't matter that they don't, they're lying to people. They're using it. So there was, between the three questions, there was one that I am I'm not sure whether I remembered well enough to address. Can you remind me?
The third one was from Heather. I don't know if that's the one you're thinking of. She says, as we recognize that we are all limbs of one body across countries, religious beliefs, etc., how do we rise and act as one voice? War politics are intentionally divisive, making monsters of others. And I also want to note in here, Trish has a follow-up question of whether you're envisioning chambers of compassion, sharing strategy, messaging, organizing tools, resources, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole point. Again, we need to look at how, I don't want to use the word enemy. I jokingly used it in Missoula, and somebody said, you are doing the same thing as the other side is doing, demonizing. I was joking, but anyhow, it wasn't. But we can learn from the success of the people who are doing, who quote unquote are on the other side. And the Chamber of Compassion is a beautiful example. They work together. They systemically work together, as well as they strategize. The different industries within the chambers of commerce. By the way, the local chambers of commerce are the fig leaves for the larger national and international ones. But within the chambers of commerce, they strategize together. Different industries have their own, local collaboration groups. The chemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the missiles industry. They don't bring those discussions to the Chamber of Commerce. They work together within their own industries, and then they come to the Chamber of Commerce in order to then collaborate systemically. Now, in the case of various peace groups within let's say within the greater Spokane area, you have some of them, PJALS has been helping to organize. There is the peace-minded groups in like bring peace to Palestine or bring peace to Kashmir, India, bring peace to different, there are different conflicts. Those people would work together within their own. Of course, this can be encouraged by the Chamber of Compassion. So the Chamber of Compassion would have, I use the term subcommittees, except it is not the Chamber of Compassion or the Intersectional Circle is not an umbrella organization. In the same way that the Chamber of Commerce is not an umbrella organization for different industries. So the Chamber of Compassion would then encourage the diversity that exists or must exist. In Kalispell, Montana, let me give you one recent example, just 2 weeks old. When I was speaking there, and they were talking about, okay, there is not much civil society activity happening in Kalispell, although there are some nonprofits. But in terms of the, how to deal with the undemonization of the homeless. By the way, in the meeting at the Mennonite church in Kalispell, I learned that there was one Mexican immigrant had been killed by a teenager, a white teenager, just a few days before. So the issue of the homeless had become violent to the point of a kid killing a homeless Mexican. So I said, okay, this is a great place, this Mennonite church, and the pastor was more than happy to do so, to provide you a space for the undemonization club of the Kalispell area, whereby you begin thinking about and talk together about how to undemonize the the homeless, especially the homeless immigrants in Kalispell. And Kalispell is a tough place. But there were some people that came to the Mennonite church, and some of them became shareholders of the community-owned Pathmobile. So anyhow, yes, the answer is all of those things need to happen. The collaboration, the strategizing, the not scheduling the same event or two events on the same evening, not stealing members from each other, different groups. I mean, all the things that people have do in order to, because there is not enough people in different areas. And because there are not enough people, it's the same few people who are doing the same thing until they give up, or they call burnout.
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm going to jump in with a note that, well, Jennifer has her hand up, but I'm also on that note going to invite folks again to check out our workshop on June 1st, which is a training that is focused on preparing us to be able to reach beyond our current members, to be able to have organizing conversations based in a shared understanding of how coded racism is used to manipulate people. So I'll just mention that again, and I'm going to find a link to share. Oh, I know what it is. It's peacejustice.org/bold. That's where you can go. So I'll put that in the chat. And I noticed that Jennifer has a question, and then I have a question, and then that may bring us to closing. So Jennifer, go ahead.
Yeah, so I had just written down so that I wouldn't forget the different organizations that I'm part of that meet maybe weekly, by every other week, once a month, whatever. So PAJALS, Vets for Peace, the Inland Northwest Coalition for the Liberation of Palestine, JVP Spokane, League of Women Voters, and Meaningful Movies. That is crazy. and what I guess I'm just wondering how I, as an individual, can somehow help create this chamber of compassion, so that I'm not pulled in all these different directions when really we're trying in many ways to pull in the same direction.
Okay, I say ding, 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 ding. The most frequently asked question that I've been asked since 2013, as I've been talking about this, was just articulated by you. It's called, Brother Moji, yet another meeting? Oh my God, I am already spent. I am already stretched thin. I go to this meeting and this meeting and this meeting, and now you want yet another meeting, yet another organization? And I'm saying that my answer, sometimes flippantly, jokingly, I say, well, have you solved a whole lot of problems doing that kind of fragmented work? But the more serious thing is that those organizations are natural allies of the Chamber of Compassion. So that in the same way that in the Chamber of Commerce, you have different industries. different industries do not stop doing what they're doing and unify under the Chamber of Commerce. They continue doing what they're doing, except that they are smart enough to realize that on the basis of their common interests, they should work together systemically, therefore effectively. So those few little organizations that you point to, God bless all of the hardy souls that are part of each of them, they would be the absolute essential components of the Chamber of Compassion. So that the question that the Chamber of Compassion asked, and I would be more than happy to do some in-depth, organizing on this. The central different question that the Chamber of Compassion people, which is composed of a representative of all of those groups that you go to, hopefully, and then some, like the Undemonization Club and the NATR tent and other groups that are needed, either existing or hopefully would be existing. When they come together in the Chamber of Compassion, they ask a different Socratic question than the usual question of the outreach, one-way outreach. This is what we are doing, join us, right? Now, the question that the Chamber of Compassion people ask, or in the Chamber of Compassion people ask, is, this is what we are doing, how can we help you? How can we help each other? And I can give you examples, very basic individual examples. How much time do we have left, Sister Liz?
Well, we are coming up, it's about 7:40, so I think we have about 10 more minutes for discussion, then we'll wrap up.
Okay, let me give you two examples, so basic. And these are from tough places. Sioux Falls, South Dakota. After Standing Rock, as I drove toward Tucson, Arizona, where I lived at the time. I live, by the way, in Boulder, Colorado now, although I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia right now. But the Circle of Nonviolence and Community Collaborative met at the UU, at the Unitarian Universalist congregation. My host, wonderful host, had, 4 toddlers, small children. And I stayed at her basement, her cold basement, by the way. But anyhow, she was my wonderful host. And in the, let's say, the Chamber of Compassion or the Circle meeting, the discussion came, like she said, when I encouraged, I said, look, how can you work together individually? She said, Brother Moji, I have so much childcare responsibilities. I really would love to be more active, really, except that I have lots of childcare responsibilities. Excuse me. Then her best friend, she is an elementary school teacher who said, I would like to be more active, except that if I am visible in the Sioux Falls, South Dakota environment, I'm going to lose my job. Very real concern. So immediately I said, okay, well, you can stay in the background, provide some childcare respite to your friend so that her time is freed up to be more active. As simple as that. Once the question is asked, this is what we're doing, how can we help each other? Different strategies, different brainstormings, different solutions begin to emerge. Another example, quick. In Moab, Utah, there wasn't a whole lot of civil society activity going. In the meeting at the community center, they had a community center actually. But anyhow, there were several ladies who were basically going to different churches. And I said, as a Muslim, I take communion at churches that offer me communion as a Muslim. By the way, that freaks the Muslims and the Christians out. Like, how can you accept the body and the blood of Christ as a Muslim and remain a Muslim? But anyhow, I'm a Sufi. I like to mess with these artificially created boundaries between different religions. But anyhow, I said, okay, interfaith dialogue. And then I asked, by the way, do you go to each other's Sunday service? Oh, the Catholic said, what? I go to the Mormon Sunday service? None of them had gone to the Sunday service of their fellow members of the Moab, Utah community. I said, do you think if the Catholic lady, and then there was an Episcopalian lady and anyhow, they hadn't gone to each other's Sunday service. I said, do you think you're going to be converted if you just go there? Okay, you can sit in the background. You can sit in the back pews. But go to these, first of all, see how different people in your community worship the divine in a different language than you're used to. But then you're there in order to become, you're a member of this community. Climate change affects you, whether you are Mormon or Catholic or Episcopalian or non-believer or whatever. So anyhow, the result of that particular circle was that, okay, we're going to go to each other's Sunday services. And then I told them about my crazy idea of, our worship, your house. See, I have this crazy dream in which I say, okay, a mosque and a synagogue and a church in a community decide to have on 2 subsequent weekends, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, to do their own worship in the house of the other. In our worship, your house, Abrahamic sharing of oneness. So imagine having a Jewish Shabbat in a mosque. Imagine having a Friday afternoon or Friday congregational prayer of Muslims at a church. So in terms of being able to break barriers that people out of ignorance or malice have created, mostly ignorance, therefore malice. But anyhow, these are strategies that once people in the Chamber of Compassion, and then again, hopefully in September, we're going to have a bunch of Chambers of Compassion have a grand opening in September to be created at the same time, connected by Zoom. And I would love Pijals to be a host in Spokane of that gathering, of the birth of the Chamber of Compassion of the Spokane area, which is a natural, like Pijals would be the absolutely natural midwife, if you will. And then it would continue work together.
We have a highly collaborative set of relationships here. I think I'm always interested in thinking about what does healthy collaboration look like? What does it mean to recognize the relationship building that has to be at the core of it? In many cases, when we're organizing across race or across gender or across orientation, we need to do some reckoning with historical harm, some restoration of relationship. And it has to, I think the vision that we can hold can be very relatively simple in its vision. Like, we all have this shared interest, let's work together. And then in the implementation, we have to grapple with the real complexity of, is there trust? What does it take to, what does accountability look like to directly impacted people? What does leadership of directly impacted people look like? What does the responsible involvement of non-impacted allies look like? All of these very complex questions that are right under the surface of that beautiful vision. We're part of a number of coalitions and collaborative efforts, some of which have been more sort of tactically based, like a joint letter is a popular tactic here in our community, very powerful tactic. Instead of anyone, one person can do the work of writing something and then can circulate it and multiple people can sign on, or a group of people. So we don't all have to be duplicating the work of writing letters, for example. But then there are longer term collaborative work, like Greater Spokane Progress is a 10-year-old collaborative network of almost 40 organizations, from which many campaign specific areas of work have sprouted, like in 2017 when we were part of defeating the anti-immigrant profiling initiative. And then there are other campaign specific collaborations that have come together, such as the Justice Not Jails coalition last fall, which was very, very successful in defeating Measure 1, as everyone, I think most people on this call were involved in talking to voters about that. And so I'm just kind of reflecting on the complexity of putting this beautiful vision into action, and the questions that then are raised about what form the tension maybe between let's all do this consistently across the country and let's do it in a way that is specific to the relationships and realities on the ground and the differentials in resources on the ground, so forth. So I don't know if you want to respond to that. And I think we should close. We should close probably in the next couple minutes.
So let me just, the complexities that you pointed are in one of the reasons that they are so complex is because there are relatively so few people trying to engage these horrendously difficult issues. So once we have more people, at Occupy Tucson, where I was one of the quote unquote leaders, we had floods of people coming out of the woodwork. They were asking what to do. Same thing with Standing Rock.
It doesn't simplify things.
I know it doesn't simplify things. Yeah, I know. But these complexities need a place where there is an entity which is called the same thing in different places, with the help of the local, mother organizations, such as yours, to then bring together unity and diversity. And that, I have a Sufi poem called The Dance of Unity and Diversity, which if people want, I can translate it to English one day. But anyhow, if you want to end the formal recording, and then we can continue if people are interested. Thank you so much.